online. Okay, so we're kicking off the next Insight series. I think this is the third one that we've run this year. And today we're here to talk about biodiversity for business with the catchy title of From Whalesharks to Winkles. And it'll become very obvious why we've picked those two animals. So just a bit of housekeeping. This is the usual things we say at the start of any of these. If you can leave all your microphones on mute when you're not talking. Katie will talk for about 20 to 25 minutes through her presentation. Then there's an opportunity for Q&A at the end. You can use the raise hand function through Zoom or type into the chat box if you don't want to talk. And then I'll feed questions back to Katie. So if you don't know me, I'm Jill Butler-Rennie and I launched the EREPS network in 2012. So we deliver a range of training for high hazard industries, supported by focused events like this, just to create a sense of community, share good practice and lessons learned. Katie?
Hello, my name's Katie Reeves. I met Jill, as she said, through the EREPS network during COVID, during a much bigger whole day of the EREPS network, which was great. And at the time I spoke about the same program I'm talking about today, but also wider ecosystem monitoring and how we monitor wildlife offshore.
Okay, so as I just mentioned, we bring together operators, regulators, contractors, NGOs, workforce and the supply chain, and all of those type of people are represented on the call today, and inspire sustainable change strategies through the training, through coaching, through one-to-one work, online communities, which I guess you're all a part of, and events such as this. And then the reason that we moved to this kind of format was during COVID, the appetite for face-to-face events completely changed. And both Katie and I have had COVID or suspected COVID in the last 3 months. I'm just coming out the end of it. So it is still kicking about. So the way that people want to consume information has entirely changed. Now, in addition to being live here today, the presentation material all gets uploaded to the website and the recording is available on the YouTube channel. And just before I hand over, why biodiversity? So a couple of years ago, I did an industry-wide, I wouldn't say it was an official survey, but I asked people what their top 5 key areas of environmental concern were. And number 2 was ecosystem damage. And that's actually why one of the panels at the event you were at, Katie, was around ecosystem damage. Now, latterly, I see a lot of operators and tier 1 contractors working toward biodiversity action plans, and certainly they reference the UN SDGs in their sustainability report at the end of the year. Now, these two, 14 and 15, life below water and life on land, are really where the focus on biodiversity is, and that is the inspiration for the action plans that the guys are working through on site. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking now because it's not great, and hand you over.
Thanks very much, Jill. Yes, so like Jill said, a lot of this is based on and about energy and offshore operators, because that's my background as well. My name's Katie Reeves. I've recently come back from living in the Middle East and set up my own consultancy called Sustainable Oceans Management for Environment, or just some consulting. And so when I've worked for operators, I worked on biodiversity projects, worked on developing biodiversity action plans, and also taking into account biodiversity during impact assessments, and also linking it into environmental management systems, and also, as Jill said, linking it into our business processes and making it important all the way up to the corporate risk registers as well, and identifying it on that kind of level. But today, that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk a lot about how to engage the workforce, but particularly people offshore, in biodiversity, and how and how it can engage people and be something quite fun, or something, as one offshore person said, just something that makes the day job more bearable off there. So next slide. So biodiversity, and click through. So biodiversity or wildlife, basically biodiversity is quite a clunky term as well sometimes, and if you're engaging people and staff, sometimes you can use biodiversity obviously, but people call it wildlife or nature, and so when you're building a campaign or communicating to people, if biodiversity is inaccessible to the audience that you're pitching to, sometimes, you know, you can just use wildlife, nature, and different terms, and it all a lot of the time means the same thing. So when scientists are talking about biodiversity, they can talk about the habitats. So a lot of what I'm talking about today is obviously the sea. So it's the zone, the pelagic zone, or the wildlife that lives on the bottom, or the wildlife that lives in the water column, or mainly at the surface, such as cetaceans or turtles. Or the whale shark, like these ones, but they obviously are throughout the whole of the water column, up and down. And so when you're talking about biodiversity, it can be anything, but a lot of the time people are looking at individual species, or what we term charismatic megafauna. So the larger species, which obviously draw people in and engage people. So I've been lucky enough to work offshore in Qatar, which is where we had the second biggest whale shark aggregation. And so that's why I've got the picture of the whale sharks on the left. But in the UK, largely we have the second largest fish in the sea, which is the basking shark. So these are seen sometimes in the North Sea, but largely on the west coast, the wider west coast, and the Celtic Sea. But it is seen around the UK, and largely in the summer period. Next slide. And also, when you're communicating about nature, what exactly does nature do for us? So a lot of the time, why should people care about nature? And it's about what the ecosystem provides for us, or what services they provide for us. People talk about, obviously, the oceans being the biggest carbon sink, and the mitigation for climate change, and the coastal wetlands are some of the biggest sequesters of carbon, such as seagrass beds, mangroves, kelp forests, and these can be found around the UK as well as internationally. I've been lucky again to work with mangroves, which are not in the UK, but we have seagrass beds and kelps around the UK, and lots of other areas that sequester carbon, and the salt marshes and mudflats as well. The oceans do so much for us. They provide 3 billion people with protein, a source of food, and that's how many people they support. There's over 50 million people employed in fisheries, 600 million rely on aquaculture, and so that it provides a great source of a resource, but also a source of income for so many people around the world. And obviously the maritime economy is vast. We have obviously shipping and the whole of the world trade going via ships across the world. The ocean tourism is worth such a lot of money, in the trillions it's valued at, both from obviously from the cruise ships all the way down to people that go to beaches, but also people that go on wildlife watching. There's lots and lots of different tours and kayaking and cruises to go and see wildlife in almost every single country of the world that has a coastline and has a tourism industry. So we have a vast economy that's based on the oceans, and it's important to link that as well sometimes, and it's part of the communication if you want to do that. And there's a good link there to the World Bank, which discusses about the blue and the maritime economies. Next slide, please. So while I'm going to go into wildlife campaigns and how to engage people, this is the corporate side. There are lots of different things about biodiversity and business, and a lot of different task forces and forums that people can engage with. And actually it's not on there, so I'll add it to a link with Jill later. But there's also the IUCN Business and Biodiversity strategy document that takes you forward how you can set up a biodiversity strategy and go on to develop action plans and then roll out, just roll those out and identify what nature is close to where you operate. So all of that is in a really good IUCN document. Why is nature so important? There's been a lot of discussion under the Convention of Biological Diversity, the Conference of Parties, the most recent one, COP15, and also under the UFCCC, they're coming together a lot more to discuss about climate and nature and how nature-based solutions are really, really important to mitigate, but and adjust in the future to climatic changes and how nature can help us with that. But obviously there's the biodiversity crisis, so the importance of nature, but also the way that biodiversity is going in the world is there's a lot of information on the Convention of Biological Diversity. So there's a link there. And in corporate reporting circles as well. So for sustainability reports, you can now do nature-related financial disclosures. And there's also a scientific targets working group on biodiversity as well, and how that links to all of your corporate level strategies as well, and your sustainability strategy. There's also the UK Business and Biodiversity Forum, so it's part of IEMA helped set that up, and IEMA runs that with RSPB and some other partners. And it's a pledge that corporate people can basically sign up to. And again, it's very, very similar to the IUCN document. It's about setting a strategy and what you want to achieve, and a biodiversity action plan that comes out of that as well. So that's more of the corporate kind of level things. But obviously, if you're working on anything to do with nature, biodiversity campaigns or projects, they obviously link to the ESG and to your sustainability strategy. And as Jill said, towards the UN sustainability goals and your work on those two, particularly number 14 and 15, as she mentioned before. And then it obviously links into an environmental management system, and it can be an opportunity to improvement, and it can be an opportunity to add towards data banks that you have, and just engage your workforce and make them feel better as well. Next slide. So the wildlife monitoring projects that I set up, is some of my background is also in campaigning. I went, funnily enough, from NGOs and as a regulator, then into an energy company and into oil and gas. So it's a wide spectrum of things, but hence why I knew how to set up and develop campaigns as well. And to develop monitoring projects. So I had a lot of contacts in some of the NGOs as well to help me set up something like this. So why did we set it up? So in 2020, we couldn't do any of our offshore monitoring. And so it was decided, somebody asked what kind of environmental projects we can do. And I was tearing my hair out that we couldn't also do the reporting on biodiversity that we needed to do. So the government, I was in Qatar when I developed this one called the Wildlife of the Al Shaheen. So that was the wildlife monitoring project. So so then when I was speaking to one of the PR and comms team, they were saying, what environmental campaign could you do? And so we'd had a sighting scheme before and asked people to do it, but we said, let's take it one step further. And it kind of mushroomed from that. Those were the ideas behind it. And so that's why we started it. And so when I sat down early on, I engaged supporters being people that are going to champion the project and take it forward. So basically engage champions and people who will support the project and take it forward. Project campaign, educational, raise awareness, however you want to call it. So with just 2 or 3 people, we sat down and wrote what the objective was, which was quite modest. It was just to increase the sightings year upon year, and increase them from the very basic level that they were. So we only had about 20 sightings a year that came in. And even when we had a very, very big background to whale sharks being there, and a lot of knowledge about whale sharks, and people used to send in when they started to come, but we only got about 20, and the aggregation in Qatar for the whale sharks is just massive. It's huge. And so they used to be whale sharks pretty much every day offshore that they could see, but we weren't being told where they were, what location they were at, because this was quite a big offshore. If people don't know, offshore in Qatar, that there are a lot of platforms, obviously for the North gas field, but also the people I was working with, the North Oil Company, have one of the biggest offshore oil fields. And so we had up to 9 platforms and 11 different locations. And so there was a lot of wildlife there, but we didn't know where it was. So we wanted to get that information back. So we sat down and wrote what the objective was, and it was important to engage supporters really, really early on. I had the most incredible PR and comms team at the time. And so when I just came up with the idea or the text, they just ran with it, and they produced a logo. So I don't know if you can see my T-shirt. We have the wildlife of the Al Shaheen, and they created a logo. And then they also created a slogan, which was spot, report and protect, which is actually on the back as well of the T-shirts that we have. So they developed that with us, and they said, is this the kind of thing that you want? And so that's how the campaign progressed. And this was really, really quickly from about March 2020. And by the end of April, we were ready to launch the campaign and start it going on. But at that time, we had a sounding group. So I asked a few people from offshore, and I was going to interview a couple of them, but they couldn't today. So I was going to ask them for their feedback, but they were hugely supportive of it. And I obviously had to have the head of field operations sign it off as well. So I got some early supporters, and then did a presentation as well as what it would entail, and would it obviously interfere with any operations, and would it be any downtime? So there was all those kind of questions that came up, and what we wanted to achieve as well, and what would happen to the data. So there was a lot of internal kind of meetings as well to explain it. And then the PR and comms people said exactly what we want to say, and how people wanted to get involved, what activities, what actions could people take. And then we developed the materials to those objectives. Next slide, please. And so part of the materials that we developed was, we had so much. We had, this is a dichotomous key that I developed with some academics that are based in Oman, who are some of the top turtle and cetacean experts, and we also got an IUCN shark expert as well to have a look at this key at the bottom. In the Middle East, there aren't that many species, and so a lot of this was easy to do, but I think that there are keys like this for the UK as well, and can be developed with academics in the UK, and there are lots out there already, and I've got some resources later on that. And so following on from this, we developed about 6 posters, 6 or 7 posters that went from sightings, how to spot. They gave tips. They were all quite large, and so they were all put up offshore in the tea rooms or on the vessels. And then we had an intranet page which had all the sightings, which had all of the posters and all of the materials that people could download and use. I did talks to every single operating entity, so from drilling and wells to marine, to the vessels. to the contractors, to any contractors that were coming online as well. I just did a few slides at each time, and then longer slides as well. We developed an online training system so people could learn how to do it as well. It didn't take very long, but it was all on our intranet site. What else did we do? I'm trying to think. And well, that was it. On the intranet site, we had the button. So to develop how people did the sightings, there was the intranet page and a button where they just filled in information. And at first, this was quite clunky. It was just done in an email, but we just before I was leaving, they were developing it a lot more and writing code behind the scenes, and to make it much more intelligent system, and went into a database that then also any kind of photos and videos, it was all put into a much bigger database that was run basically on the servers, and so it could download things at different periods from offshore when they were sending them offshore or coming back off vessels as well. So the other thing is that next slide, please. I think it's the next slide. Yeah. So that was the work in the background, and so whenever I got a sighting in as well, I made sure to send an email to say thank you. And whenever you're doing a campaign, so for the first year I just said thank you and sent an email and said that's great. And then to keep it going, we did a quarterly sighting, and we did first, second and third prizes. And they, as part of the HSE department, it was kind of the environmental campaign, and they either got a voucher or they got a prize of some kind. And that was to keep it going and to keep building the momentum throughout 2020 and all the way through 2021. And then in 2021, I was given a bit more of a budget when people could see that there was a lot more traction in it. And that's when we developed the T-shirts. And the chaps offshore absolutely love the T-shirts. So every time there was a sighting, the HSC superintendents had quite a few shirts, and they could give them out for every sighting that was submitted, both on the FSOs, but also on the platforms and the vessels. And so even if they didn't get it immediately, we could send it to wherever they were based, whether it was on the port or offshore. So that's how we kind of built the momentum for the first couple of years. And then after the second year, we did an annual competition to choose the best sighting out of the whole year, either with videos and also with photos. And so they were either very good, they were based on what it was to science and how important it was, and also it didn't have to be a perfect photo or video. And obviously sometimes some of the sightings were not that, because they couldn't, because it wasn't intrinsically safe to have your phone anyway in some of the locations. So that was how we just kept going with it. I worked probably about 2 hours a week on just continuing it and making sure that all of the people were thank you, sending the T-shirts out. And so I was very lucky to have a supportive HSC team that let me develop this and roll it out and keep going with it. Next slide. So what happened, we got a 200% increase in the first year, because we had quite a modest objective from the start, was just to increase the sightings. And then since then, it has increased the sightings year upon year. And the feedback from offshore was really positive. People were engaged quite a bit. I got sightings from almost every single drilling rig that was offshore, lots of vessels, the FSOs, as well as just the platform locations. And also sometimes people going back and forward in the choppers as well. They sent me sightings when and if they could. And it was something to get involved with when safe, obviously, but they were really good. And some people stood for 5-10 minutes, and it also linked into mitigation measures. And so people were much more engaged when we were talking about drilling or when we were doing any kind of acoustic work or seismic survey, and the understanding grew as to why we were doing certain things as well offshore. And so that was all really, really positive as well. And the other thing is that not only did I start getting sightings from the surface, we also got sightings then from the people with the ROV, and there's the other ROV projects where you can submit the data to Southampton University under the Sea Serpent project, but these were also ones that were near the sea surface as well. And this one was under a platform location when somebody was doing some construction work and they had the ROVs out and they managed to capture this footage. And it wasn't just the whale sharks that they captured as well. They had a lot of other ray species that they videoed, and then we also managed to find some odd behavior around platforms and to give that to academics to use in the University of Qatar. And so with the data that we had, we managed to the data we passed on to academics, and I checked the sightings with the IUCN with some of the IUCN experts that I knew, to make sure that the sighting was correct and would it be the right one. And then because of the paucity or the lack of data offshore, we managed to get papers written because of both behavior but also species abundance and absence. So we managed to get a new to science of scalloped hammerheads in the Arabian Gulf. There was a lot of excitement when some of the rays were also seen eating eating basically the barnacles and using the legs of the platforms as a food source. And we also managed to find out that loggerheads were basically sighted quite a lot in the Al Shaheen, which is offshore in the Arabian Gulf, and they're not really seen in the Gulf at all. The greens and the hawksbills are, but it was a species that nests outside the Arabian Gulf and came in. And so that was data that I could pass to turtle experts. And so they are interested also in investigating that further, and they're doing a turtle and cetacean survey now to try and discover, to take it forward. So the wildlife project then developed into something else. It gave enough information to be able to create another project that was interesting both to the regulator but also internally as well, and it gives us data. Next slide, please. So taking it further, if you could, taking it further, we basically ended up mapping a lot of the data. So whenever a sighting comes in, and of course it's clustered over, you can see the A, B, C, D, those are platform locations. So the other ones are from vessels, the green and the red are from vessel sightings going backwards and forwards. Some of it was from also a seismic survey that happened. And so we collected a lot of data, and year upon year we add basically every single sighting that comes in, and it's mapped like that, and then we gave that data into the regulator as well so they could use it. And like I said, it wasn't just our location, it wasn't just the operator I was working for, there was also other operators that could use the data as well then. Next slide. And so other things that we did is after understanding what kind of species we had and what seasons they were in, we also developed a marine megafauna management plan, and we also developed different mitigation measures to as soon as we could see that there were interactions between a lot of the vessels. And also this was for whale sharks, and we developed a speed limit, and we also developed no-go zones for the aggregation, which was all part of the megafauna management plan. And so all of this was as part of basically the biodiversity action plan. But people also had a bigger awareness then of looking out for wildlife when they were offshore. Next slide. So engaging your people and how to do it. Basically, you can support staff to engage with what they call the sightings program, like I did, or citizen science projects. And it helps researchers address important knowledge gaps. As I said, we managed to find out some interesting things from Qatar, but it can happen all across the world because it's so expensive to monitor biodiversity in the marine environment, and people in offshore areas are there, they're present, they understand about it. In the North Sea, there was always the North Sea Bird Network, and they have dedicated projects that like with the Sea Watch Foundation that do what we call effort related and different monitoring projects. But if you have the citizen science, it helps to add on to that data and to focus on different areas. So it just adds to that information and to build models about the populations that are there. So another action you can do is if you want to take it forward, is you can get different people to come and talk. There's loads of people out there that would give a speech online from all of the different wildlife. There's the sharks, obviously the elasmobranchs, the cetaceans, the birds, the turtles, and all of those are present in the UK. And you can engage them further afield as well if you want to talk about things that are both offshore but also onshore or coastal, whatever's relevant to your operations and what you want to do. Next slide, please. And to have fun with it. So engaging them can be, you can link your actions and narrative to nature. So in the same thing we did as well was linking nature to single-use plastic bottles. So offshore in Qatar, it's very, very hot. They had a lot of plastic bottles, like I think we used over 1 million a year. And so building into that campaign, I built them both together, and how plastic was related to nature and how single-use plastic is in the oceans and how to reduce that, and how to and how to do it both offshore, and people in different locations, and including the OIMs, the installation managers, helped to reduce plastic waste at different points. So all on the actual, whether that was as they walked off using a reusable bottle, or just reducing it and not using any kind of plastics offshore at all. And so that was something else we did, and it all links into the environmental management system, but you don't have to say that it's that dry environmental management system. They're just campaigns to engage people, and it all goes in the background, linking into your sustainable development, your sustainability reports and strategies, but it's one way just to engage people, and linking it to nature makes it relevant to nature as well. So one thing that you can do as well is just to make it a human story about what you personally are doing. If you can click, Jill, a couple of times. So one thing was about the plastic waste. That was me with all of that's how plastic used to come from offshore and be either plastic bottles or massive plastic bags, and then it used to get chopped up. So I did a story I visited the recycling factory because people were saying it didn't get recycled and what happened. So it was just about being clever about doing a film and about what happened if they recycled the plastics that were coming from offshore. And so we literally did a film of somebody doing something offshore and came onshore and followed that whole film and story. And so that was a basis of the plastic free campaign as well, linking it into nature, because we showed plastic bottles falling into the ocean and splitting up, and then we followed that story. And then just something personally, I've just done a big fundraising effort, but swimming a lot in the whole month of June, and so that was related to manta rays, which are some of my favorite marine animals, and so it was just promoting that with friends and on LinkedIn. But also you can get support for doing something like a volunteering or fundraising from Biodiversity, and even doing that is helping to engage other people to say, would you like to come along and do this? Was across the oceans, so you're doing it with lots of other people across the world, but there are so many different biodiversity related fundraising activities that you can do, and as I said, it's just about making that story and about making it a human story as well. Next page. So in the UK, whilst we didn't have as many sighting schemes and things that you could do, here in the UK there are. There's obviously the Sea-Watch Foundation, which has got the recording and the submitting for cetaceans. But there's also the JNCC, which I haven't put the link here, but I can do and then send it as well. There's a JNCC led, but with I've forgotten who it's with, but anyway, the Danish scientific, they have a joint cetaceans sightings database as well, and they have very, very similar reporting forms that were similar to what we have, and similar to the Sea-Watch Foundation. So you can still record and report there. There's a list on the Wildlife Trust website of all the different sightings and strandings you can do. The Shark Trust has a shark sightings database for globally. So this isn't just applicable in the UK. If you have operations internationally, it can work there as well. Locally, you can do a great egg case hunt if you have people onshore as well as offshore, or promote things people can do when they're also going back home. So the egg case hunt is something you can do on UK beaches, and it's one way to get involved to do with sharks. And obviously, because sharks are some of my favorite animals and wildlife as well, and that's why I do talk a lot about sharks. So the Marine Conservation Society as well does about turtles and jellyfish, and the jellyfish sightings are important, and it goes from the Marine Conservation Society into Exeter University. So so they have links to do with wildlife sightings there. Oh, sorry, that's the cetacean. Yeah, the ICES link is the one for JNCC. So they do it with ICES. So it's down there. And then obviously Exodus have just set up this offshore bird portal, which is where you can submit bird sightings, which are important to do with your biodiversity action plans here in the UK, but also with decommissioning that's coming up, and you have to understand where birds are and how they use the installations at the moment in the UK. So that is a newly set up bird portal, which is similar to what was the North Sea Bird Network as well, that carried on for decades, but that unfortunately stopped running recently. And so there's lots, and the Serpent Project is obviously to do the ROV footage. If anybody's not heard about that, it's really, really awesome. It is that oil and gas operators can submit ROV footage to support different mapping projects of benthic habitats. And for us, we actually found in the Gulf some amazing areas of big sea fans, and different other species which were coming from gas seeps, and so, or historic gas seeps. They weren't still seeping, and so they created like a mini hub of biodiversity. And this was something again that the regulator didn't know about, and similar to what the JNCC is there, they didn't know about it. And so it's really, really important, if you can and you get your the support of your organization, to be able to submit to academics like the Serpent Project. I think that's it. So I've just put in a lovely video of the whale sharks, which are present in the Shaheen. And it's similar to what you can, some of the things that you can do and provide back to staff to watch, but also a lot of them provided amazing videos to me that I got to watch and to have access to so much data that was valuable, but also people loved watching as well. So we managed to put all of these up onto the intranet and develop the campaign from that. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Katie. Right, has anybody got any questions? I'll maybe give you a minute or so to gather your thoughts, because I've got obviously lots. I mean, me included, but a lot of environmental advisors obviously did marine biology at university, Katie, and this is the kind of thing we thought we'd be doing. And instead, we capture data on spreadsheets and report it to somebody.
Yeah.
it is a dream come true. But of course, it just happens that you were surrounded by charismatic megafauna in the Gulf. That's not to say that it isn't in the North Sea, is it?
No, there's a lot in the North Sea. So when you look at the JNCC biodiversity databases, and the cetacean maps, there is quite a lot in the North Sea. There's obviously seals, which we don't have in the Gulf, so they have the grey and the common seal. So no, there is a lot more out there in the North Sea as well.
For me, it's orca. I mean, I'm pretty much used to seeing seals, so I live in Newborough, which is about 16 miles north of Aberdeen, and it's one of the biggest grey seal populations, I think, in the whole of the UK, if not Europe, literally at the bottom of my garden, which is amazing. But if you haven't got the scalloped hammerheads, the whale sharks, which is probably my favourite, is it as easy to get people involved if we are talking about winkles or we are talking about grey seals?
It's not obviously offshore, you won't see as much, but there are the birds still, so you will always see birds. So there is different types of biodiversity. No, maybe not the big charismatic megafauna, but you do have birds, and as you come back onshore as well, it's about understanding whether they want to do it offshore when they come back from the platforms as well.
And I think one of the things, so I do a lot of training for environmental reps, and I think that would be the ideal role to lead one of these kind of projects from offshore. It would certainly be a focal point. What we always would suggest in the training is get them away from just the standard tasks that people seem to do of looking in bins and segregating, recyclates and, doing checklists. This is surely much more interesting to do. But the other part of the training is showing videos of, just how do microplastics get into the food chain? How do chemicals, bioaccumulate up to whales and dolphins? Because we're so focused on compliance based and, telling people what they can and can't do. That I think we're missing a trick by not showing them the actual marine biology side of it, because nobody couldn't not be taken by your videos and by what you're saying.
And that's exactly it. That's why we say about linking them together and about having that story, about showing we showed plastics that were there before the whale shark comes along, or a cetacean, a shark, anything from the UK. There's lots of people that can provide that kind of narrative and to help environmental reps offshore to do that story. And that's why, and the comms teams help with that. And to build that kind of story and narrative, like you said, and to link that, yes, you're just checking the bins or you're doing something slightly different, that makes it a bit more interesting, like you said, rather than just have we segregated, have we put it in the thing. So making it just a little bit different, but it can be linked to doing your SEEPs registers as well, to link to pollution. It can be linked to so much more.
We just need to understand why we're doing it. And oil and water monitoring is a classic example. But, it's only in the last probably 8 years, maybe, that they considered the impact of the chemicals in the produced water stream, which had a way bigger impact than the actual oil content. But unless people know that, then it just becomes a chore of, twice daily sampling and getting your knuckles wrapped if something isn't, calibrated properly. We'll miss the point of why we're doing all of this.
I think so, and I think that's part of why that's part of what drove me to do it as well, is that to engage the people. It was COVID, they also couldn't come back onshore, a lot of them. The rotations were really, really difficult, and so it was just trying to get them to engage in something a bit different, but then linking it into our actions afterwards. So it was linked as well to the acoustics. Could I go into this area to do the seismic survey? Why can't I do the percussive noise? Why are we doing the mitigation measures for percussive noise? Why do we have to spend so much more money on it? And I already had a lot of input and data and support basically internally to say this is why we're doing it. Apart from just it's legislative, we have to do it.
I don't know if you'll have the actual reference to hand, but another thing that we talk about in training is there a link between climate change and reductions in biodiversity? Because when you look at statistics, and I'm not playing devil's advocate just to be difficult, I'm just saying statistically, you know, over millennia, there's peaks and troughs in number of species on the planet. And when you have big environmental events, you could lose up to 75 and 80% of number of species globally. But that's okay because it was part of a natural cycle. Are we in a place where we're losing a huge percentage of species? Is it facilitated by climate change? Does that speed it up?
Yes, and yes, and yes. So yes, the biodiversity crisis has happened again, the same as the climate crisis, to a very short timescale. And I'm not talking about a meteor hitting the earth like the dinosaurs, but the level of biodiversity loss in the last few decades has been almost 50% of biodiversity loss, and I can't remember if it's since the 80s or the 50s. So I can find the reference and put it through, but the Convention on Biological Diversity that I had a link to earlier has the global report from every year and why we are in basically an extinction, what they call an extinction. And why biodiversity is important for, like I said, nature-based solutions is that by losing biodiversity, our resilience as humans, and also so like fisheries and coastal fisheries and the services that biodiversity gives us are impacted more by climate change. And so if you look at just coral reefs, and you're going to have less fish there. If you're overfishing them, they won't be as resilient to some of the climatic changes that are coming as well. And so that is why we talk about biodiversity and nature as being so intertwined. And if you take out, so say like from whaling, one whale sequesters so much more carbon because it takes up, and there was something done, and I'll have to put that in the references as well, about how just one whale sequesters so much more carbon, and so does the pelagic system, as well as being the coastal wetlands, which are similar to a tropical rainforest and sequester so much carbon. So it's by having more biodiversity, we're making basically humans have a longer lifespan on the planet as well.
And just to put this into a kind of local context, you know, in the UK, there was no, I'll have to be careful because you might not be able to understand what I'm saying, no mow May, where you didn't mow your garden for May. And I live in a reasonably small village, and we have a eco group, and everybody was shown all the amazing pictures of the things that they'd achieved just in 4 weeks of not mowing, you know, coming into the summer. And a lot of onshore facilities, obviously, you've got entirely different resources to an offshore platform, and they were able to get involved with having you know, areas around their sites where they didn't mow them, and a site quite close to where I am just now, they're looking at having bees installed just outside of the perimeter fence. And again, how much more interesting is that than bin raking, quite frankly?
Yeah. There's so much that terrestrially, there's so much you can do. There's no mow May, there's now let it bloom June, so you don't cut it down during June as well. And in fact, they say leave it until September if you can. And there's so many things on, like with so many NGOs in the UK. There's the Wildlife Trust website, which talks about how biodiversity can engage people, how it helps with the mental health, and there's lots and lots, there's so many different studies into health and environment, and how looking out on something green, particularly when you're in hospitals, in aids recovery and speeds up recovery, or it just makes people feel better. So that is where the Wildlife Trust have a very, very good online business kind of and biodiversity, and say that you can do volunteer days, you can go out to local nature reserves, you can, as you said, develop a very small area where they can have hotels for bees, and they can put up bat boxes, bird boxes, put up feeding stations if you want to. Obviously there's caveats to all of those, but whatever you can do, there's so many things you can do to encourage people to get involved with biodiversity, wildlife, nature, and the sky's the limit, really. There's lots of resources out there, and particularly if you're operating onshore as well, there is a lot more you can do.
So just finally, we've been doing this our entire life. It's, you know, what we get up on the morning for, but it's not always easy. So just in summary, what would be the biggest challenge if an operator listening to this, an environmental manager, environmental advisor, I want to do more? What would be their biggest challenge?
I think it's always time and resource, obviously. So if they're saying they want to do it, they will have to put away, like I said, 2 hours of my time. And that's not the setup of the program. So the setup of the program took roughly 2 to 3 weeks. And that wasn't full time, because obviously we were still running the EMS. The day job was there, and obviously, because we operate, we had to still get permits, we had to deliver to the regulator, you still had all of that, but it was just carving out some time in 2 to 3 people's in 2 to 3 people and prioritizing that. So it's always about time and resource, whether that's budgetary and humans, and who's enthusiastic. So if somebody's enthusiastic about it and they want to go forward, and it's about empowering them to do that as well. And then it's about empowering other people to take it on and to champion it as well, just like you would do for a safety campaign.
And I think once people kind of get into the detail of this, then they're almost self-empowered, because it becomes so interesting. And I just made a couple of notes, you know, if anybody's listening who didn't know this already, lists of any of the charismatic megafauna that you might see around your installation. They're in your permits, your environmental impact assessment, your oil spill contingency plan. And if you don't know what they look like, you know, you can Google it. But I think everybody knows what an orca is. There's mostly bottlenose dolphins that we would get in the Moray Firth here, but a whole range of other ones that you would see quite regularly. Okay, right. Well, if nobody's got any questions, just to finish up, I will send this out to everybody who was registered, but you can get in touch with Katie there, connect with her on LinkedIn, share the information with your teams. This is the first part of, you know, engaging, empowering and educating them as to why you want them to record any of the data that we ask for them. And I'll also include the the link to YouTube. Oh, thank you. So I think everybody is probably just a little bit dumbstruck at the amazing videos and pictures, Kate, because yeah, it really is breathtaking. And like I say, it's the stuff of dreams to have done your job.
I think so.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jill.
Thank you all for your time. Thank you very much, Katie, and no doubt we'll be hearing from you again.
Definitely. See you later. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.